All right, I want to thank everyone for being here and for making it to the last session on Friday afternoon. I commend you and appreciate that. Today we're going to be talking about Direct Connect. This is going to be a deep dive. So going in, there's going to be an expectation that you are familiar with AWS services in general, and you have some experience with Direct Connect. We're going to get into a little bit more advanced topics. But if you're not familiar with Direct Connect, that's perfectly okay. I'm going to spend the first few minutes giving a quick overview of the service to catch everybody up and get a baseline going. We're going to jump right in and try to put as much information in 45 minutes and leave enough time to answer some questions that you might have. I'm happy to stay afterwards and address any questions that you might have. All right, so let's jump right in. What is AWS Direct Connect and why do we need it? Customers are in a different, as they're taking the journey into the cloud, some customers are ready to be all in on AWS or the cloud in general, while others still have resources, data centers, capital expenses that they still need to leverage and utilize. So from an AWS perspective, we have several features and services to help customers leverage their existing infrastructure as well as take advantage of AWS resources. So, for example, that's how VPC got started, Virtual Private Cloud. Direct Connect is one of those services that will give you the ability to leverage your data center environment and connect that to the resources running on AWS. At a very high level, Direct Connect is a dedicated connection between your data center and the AWS environment. The traditional way to connect would be to go over the internet. With Direct Connect, you completely bypass that traditional path. It is a dedicated circuit, so you have a lot of benefits that come inherent with that approach. First of which is consistent network performance. Nowadays, the internet has plenty of bandwidth. That's not an issue, but there's often variability in the performance, and depending on the application that you are running, some applications are not very tolerant to that variability. So if you're looking for consistent performance, Direct Connect is able to deliver that. The other advantage or reason to use Direct Connect, as with many other AWS services, it is elastic in nature, meaning you can combine multiple AWS Direct Connect connections to meet the demand that you're looking for. Another one is a great opportunity for saving costs from a bandwidth utilization perspective. If you look at the red graph that represents your typical charges in the US East region, where you start at outgoing traffic from AWS. As you know, any traffic coming into AWS is free, but outgoing traffic in US East region starts at 9 cents per gigabyte, and the price decreases as you use more bandwidth. With Direct Connect, it is fixed at 2 cents per gigabyte in US East. So there's definitely an opportunity for cost savings from a bandwidth perspective using Direct Connect. All right, so now you all know what Direct Connect is, right? From a technical perspective, it's a fairly straightforward service. You have this connection into AWS. Currently, it's either a 1 gig or a 10 gig connection or port. If you are looking for something that is below 1 gig, that is available through a list of Direct Connect partners. You can get 50 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, whatever you need to meet your specific requirements. Anything sub 1 gig is available through our partners. At the heart of it, it's an Ethernet connection to AWS, and we leverage 802.1q for VLAN tagging. And also the MTU is 1,500 bytes. The basic unit is a connection, or the port. We have a physical device with a port to which you do a cross-connect or a physical connection into. So that's the basic unit. On that physical port, you are able to leverage 802.1q and assign different virtual interfaces identified with different VLAN IDs. And those virtual interfaces can, if they are private, and I'll get into the details of that, they'll give you connectivity into your different virtual private clouds or VPCs, or you can specify a public interface which gives you access to the public endpoints in our AWS regions. And at the heart of it, we leverage BGP for routing as a routing protocol. All right, so this is just a picture representation of what I just explained. You have your router, you have the AWS router, and there's a connection between them as a physical connection. On that physical connection, you're going to have multiple virtual interfaces identified by different VLAN IDs. And as you can see, each one of those VLAN IDs, if they are private, they provide you connectivity to a virtual private cloud or a VPC. And you have your public, I'm going to refer to them as VIF for your virtual interface. So from now on, just for convenience, I refer to them as a VIF. It'll give you access to the public endpoints such as S3, SQS, DynamoDB, all the service endpoints available on AWS. Okay? Well, there's supposed to be a, well, this is strange. You can still hear me with this? Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, the globe is washed out, but this is a geographical representation of all of our Direct Connect locations worldwide. We currently have 15, multiple in the United States, but also throughout the globe, like in Europe or Singapore or Australia or Brazil. Okay. So I'm going to go through the basics of how to get a Direct Connect in place. How do you connect to this particular service? So the first task, after selecting the region or the location of your Direct Connect, you need to, which is primarily it's a physical location in a particular geographical area. You need to order the transport into that physical facility so that your data can flow, obviously. So the first part, once you identify the Direct Connect location, the next task is to identify the service provider that you work with at the transport level and order a transport. Now, you have a wide variety of choices for the transport. You can do just a point-to-point, leveraging WDM, or you could use just a direct metro Ethernet connection into that facility, or you can use a multi-point technology such as MPLS or IPVPN to access that facility. Now, if you've worked in the telco world, you'll be very familiar with the term LOA CFA, which is also one step of the provisioning process. And I'll get into more detail of what the LOA CFA means, and I'll actually show you an example of what one looks like, the piece of paper. But basically, it's the authorization to be able to do that cross-connect from that the Direct Connect facility into the AWS router. All right? Once you have the LOA CFA, you can at that point place the order for the cross connect into the Direct Connect service. All right? This is just a screenshot through the AWS console that shows you how to select the region and create a Direct Connect connection. This is only that first part. It's really just selecting the region and selecting the port speed. Right now, you'll have the option of 1 gig or 10 gig connection. Once you make that selection, then you need to get the LOA and CFA. And as literally all it does, the letter of authorization is in effect allowing or giving permission to the vendor that owns the colocation facility to terminate your connection into the AWS router. The connecting facility agreement, you provide the detail. It includes the detail. What that means is the exact port number on the physical piece of equipment from AWS that would be dedicated to you to create that connection. All right. One very important piece of information, once you obtain the LOA CFA, it's typically valid for about 90 days. So you need to make sure you coordinate with your transport provider that the circuit or service will be delivered in time before the LOA or CFA expires. So don't be in a hurry to generate the LOA CFA until you have a firm commit date from your provider. Okay? This is just what a LOA CFA looks like. This is an actual one where we've whited out a few sensitive information, but primarily it just designates the exact port on a patch panel to which the vendor will actually terminate the cross connect. Okay. All right. So once you have the connection in place, the next step, you've done the physical portion of the connection. The next step is to build the logical connections, and that's where the virtual interfaces come into play. And each virtual interface needs a unique VLAN ID, and that's how we identify it, and that's how we associate a particular virtual interface with the VPC that you've selected to attach that interface to. Okay. And if you do talk to a vendor to get a sub 1 gig connection, or it is important to note that those come with a singleton virtual interface, which means you cannot run more than one VIF on that one hosted connection from the third-party vendor. So if you wish to run or connect a second VPC, for example, to your data center, it can't run on the same hosted connection. You need to make sure you work with with the partner and order another hosted virtual interface. All right. Ethernet is Ethernet. I love this one. If you leave this session and you only remember one thing, this is the one thing I want you to remember. Because I seem to talk to a lot of people, and people often miss this one point, even internal to our organization. This is just showing an example where you have a data center connecting to the Direct Connect facility using IPVPN MPLS. All right? And the router is physically in the Direct Connect location where and from that router, then you deliver an Ethernet cross-connect into our router. But what if you are able to put your router in your data center and leverage a service like Metro Ethernet and deliver an Ethernet into the colocation facility, what that means is you are, sorry, I went ahead. There is no requirement to have a physical router at the Direct Connect location. There's a misconception that you really need to have a router there. If your transport provider is able to drop a single mode fiber running Ethernet and supports 802.1q, it just gets terminated on a patch panel, and then you do the cross connect into our router, and you don't need to lease half a rack or a full rack at that location facility, colocation facility, in order to terminate your Direct Connect physical connection. Okay? Ethernet is Ethernet. If you're able to deliver it to us, whether it's local or in your data center, we don't care. We don't know the difference. All right? Let's talk about public virtual interfaces. As I mentioned, you can have both private and public, and the public interfaces, that gives you access to the public service endpoints. Not only to the public service endpoints, but also if you have an environment running on EC2, you can access your EC2 environment if you allow traffic to the outside world through your security groups and access control lists. You'll be able to reach those resources using the public virtual interface as you would normally coming through the internet. Okay? Now, to configure a public virtual interface, you need to have a autonomous system number, that's in BGP speak, and you also need to specify a BGP authentication key to establish a BGP peering session. It's hard to see the screen, so I'm talking backwards here. I apologize. And from the AWS perspective, we need to ensure that the CIDR block that you are advertising to us is actually owned by you. So there is a manual process which adds about a 24 to 48 hour delay. We need to ensure that the IP address block that you're advertising is actually owned by you. If you don't own an IP address block, what do? So you need to work with your ISP, and you need to ensure that they will allow you to utilize that block and get a letter of authorization from them so that we will allow you to advertise that block on the public interface in Direct Connect. All right? And this is just a screenshot of specifying or the configuration of a public VIF through our console. And if you've set up a Direct Connect before, this should look familiar. It'll give you a place where you put your autonomous system number and the CIDR block that you are going to be advertising. All right. On the other hand, if you have a private virtual interface, then you can advertise any IP address block that you wish. A lot of people take an extension of the IP address block that they use in their data center, and they assign a CIDR block out of that and advertise it. In effect, you're extending your data center's network into AWS. So you use that address block. There's no wrong or right way to do it. The only thing you need to ensure is that you don't do any, make sure that you don't do any overlapping CIDRs that you are utilizing on-prem and in the AWS cloud. And that also applies in your VPC environments. Whenever you specify a CIDR block for your VPC, ensure they are non-overlapping CIDRs. It'll save you a lot of headaches as you grow and expand your services. Okay? Similarly, you'd need to specify an autonomous system number, and you do the same route exchange through BGP. So to do Direct Connect, you need to talk BGP on your router. All right, and this is the screenshot of how to set up a private VIF on our console. All right, that picture tells 1,000 words. So here's a picture of a standard configuration using a single router, a single port, in a single region. You'll see you have a single physical connection, and on that connection, in this case, there are two private VIFs and one public VIF. All right. You can have multiple public VIFs running on the same connection and multiple private ones as well. Now, if you're looking for redundancy, you can use two routers, dual port, and in a single region. And when you do so, our service identifies that you are the same customer, and we make sure that you do terminate those connections into separate AWS physical routers. So you still have the high availability on our side as well. So you got dual on your side, and we make sure that we have a dual configuration on our side, and we have redundancy. Now you can set up this configuration in active-active mode in BGP multipath. Or if you wish, you can also set it up in active-passive, although it makes more sense to leverage the existing bandwidth and use it passive-passive, but either way, it's your choice. You get to select the configuration that meets your needs, okay? And you do all of that. I have some customers that are very careful to provide high availability at this layer, but they neglect to provide fiber redundancy going into their building, for example. So if you do set up something like this, make sure you don't have only one fiber path going into your building. Make sure you use different fiber providers. So if there's a backhoe accident and the fiber gets cut, or something happens with a particular piece of equipment from their transport vendor, that you have a redundant fiber path as well. All right. Okay. Now, as far as the traffic flow is concerned, you are able to use BGP AS path prepend to control how the traffic flows and what path is selected for that traffic. So we do support AS prepend. I do need to call out one exception. If you are using a public virtual interface and using a private ASN number, we will not support AS prepending. So if you have a public ASN assigned to you and you want to configure public virtual interfaces, it's a good idea to use that actual ASN number for the Direct Connect configuration. This way you can do AS path prepend for your BGP. Okay. Another common configuration is to have that availability functionality through VPN connection. So you set up one Direct Connect connection, and then you'll leverage the internet and a VPN IPsec tunnel to provide you the high availability that you're looking for. Again, you need to be mindful of the fiber access into your building or your data center. Ensure that your ISP connectivity runs over a different fiber path. Okay. Now let's talk about a more advanced routing configuration. As you might be aware, with our VPC peering setup currently does not support edge-to-edge routing or transitive routing. And what that means, if you have 3 VPCs, A, B, and C, and you set up a peering relationship between A and B and another one between B and C, it does not mean that A can talk to C. You have to set up another peering relationship between A and C. As you imagine, if you have a large number of VPCs and you start establishing that mesh, that can get quite complex. So operationally, if you want to avoid some of the burden that comes to that, you could leverage, if you have Direct Connect, you can leverage Direct Connect and set up what we refer to as lollipop routing. So and I will have a visual that will help you with just to see it in motion. One thing that you need to be mindful of with BGP, if you have a autonomous system and it sees an advertisement coming from a BGP peer which originated from the same autonomous system, by default that traffic or that route advertisement is blocked to avoid loops in the routing paths. That would be a problem in the lollipop routing setup. But there is a configuration command with BGP that allows you to work around that, and that's the AS override. Okay? And that's something to be mindful of. That's been a gotcha for a few people. All right, I love automation and pictures, so this hopefully will demonstrate what lollipop routing looks like, where you have let's start with a simple single VPC environment, and a VGW is a virtual gateway to which you terminate or you assign a virtual interface, a private virtual interface into that VPC. And let's say you have a /16, 10.1/16 CIDR. How that configuration would look is you'll have a unique VLAN tag. You'll have your autonomous system number, which is 7224, and you have that 10.1/16 CIDR that you're advertising. I can't see the screen, so I have to come this way. I apologize. So it will go to your router using that virtual interface with the tag of 101. That's a simple setup with one single VPC. Let's say you have another VPC and you have the 10.2 CIDR /16 CIDR assigned. Similarly, it would have the same setup. You would advertise that /16 using the 7224 ASN number. And that again will have a virtual interface into your router. And let's use a third one as well, similar setup. Now let's say VPC1 wants to talk to another VPC. As you'll notice on your customer side, what you're advertising is the supernet of 10./8. Or you could do it as a default route as well. So what that means is traffic will flow from VPC1, go to your router, and then reach VPC3 through the Direct Connect. You can see why we call it lollipop routing. From a BGP point of view, you're advertising the 10/8. So VPC sends it to your sends it to your router because that's what the BGP routes indicate. Once it reaches your router, it looks at the destination, and it's 10.3/16 CIDR. So it'll go back the Direct Connect and reach VPC3 that way. It's a commonly used technique for advanced configurations with a large number of VPCs. Okay, now let's take let's make a distinction in for the US regions for the Direct Connect Direct Connect services available in the US regions. If you set up a public virtual interface, all the routes from all the US regions are advertised to you. So you are able to reach all the public service endpoints of all the US regions if you set up one Direct Connect connection and set up a public virtual interface. That's today the way you can access the GovCloud region through Direct Connect. You set up a public VIF, and you're able to reach your VPCs and the target region and set up IPsec VPN tunnels to provide additional layer of security. Okay. Okay, let's take the scenario where you establish two Direct Connect connections, one in the US East region and another in the US West one. And let's say you want to be reach the S3 endpoint in US West 2 from your internal network. Which path do you think it's going to take? Is it going to go to east or is it going to go to west? If you don't do anything, it could take either. We don't know. So imagine going that way. Does that make much sense? Not really. So you need to be able, we provide you the routing advertisements. You need to be able to make the required configurations to control how your traffic will flow to the AWS network. And you can leverage BGP local preferences to do so, to control where and how the traffic flows. And in this particular setup, since I'm sure you're setting up two Direct Connect connections to get a little bit of high availability and disaster recovery. If you want that transition to happen quickly, make sure you leverage BFD configuration. But the main point here is we advertise the routes to you. You need to be able to make the right decisions to configure your environment to route the traffic to AWS in the way that you want it to route. Don't just take the default because we can't make those decisions for you. It might go the wrong path. Okay. All right, and I just wanted to show a more advanced configuration that is typically used by global organizations where you have multiple connections to multiple Direct Connect facilities around the globe. And in that case, you also have the ability I'm showing to set up both public and private virtual interfaces in all those different regions, and also leverage VPC peering to connect the different VPCs in the different accounts globally. Okay. What's common? When you see the customer IPVPN MPLS backbone, it does not have to be IPVPN MPLS. It could be any wide area network configuration that you currently have in place. It could be dedicated circuits. It could be whatever technology that you choose. It does not matter. It's whatever fabric that you use to connect your data centers. And those data centers, in turn, have connections into the Direct Connect facilities to give you global coverage. Okay? Now let's talk about billing. From an AWS perspective, once you establish a Direct Connect connection, you pay for the port. So if you get a 1 gig or a 10 gig port, you pay for that port. And then you also pay for the outbound traffic, as I mentioned earlier, which is 2 cents per gig in the US East region. That's not all the costs associated with this. You have a direct relationship with your transport vendor, so you need to make sure that you take those costs into account. And typically, those setups require at a minimum 1 year or even multi-year agreements to get the best prices. For AWS, there's no minimum requirement. You can turn the ports off at any time that you wish, and we start billing you for them. That typically is not the case when we're talking about the transport. Another cost that you need to be aware of is the cross-connect. The cross-connect, the Direct Connect partner where the equipment is located is responsible for providing that physical cross-connect, and they're going to charge you for that. One important point that I failed to mention, if you don't have a direct billing relationship with that provider, you cannot order the cross-connect. If you have a relationship with your local transport provider, who then owns that relationship with the colo provider, you need to make sure that you instruct them to place the crossover order with the Direct Connect vendor, facilities vendor. Okay. All right, let's talk about some limits that you need to be aware of, so you can plan for them and they don't bite you when you're trying to deliver a service in the last minute. Whenever you have established a BGP peering between your router and AWS at a virtual interface or a VGW level, there's a limit of 100 routes that we accept from you. It weighs around that. If you really need to advertise that many routes, you can aggregate them and advertise a smaller number of routes. That usually does not come into play in a vast majority of use cases. Now, another one you need to be aware of is if you have, in combination of virtual interfaces as well as VPN connections, if you have more than 50, you need to make sure you contact AWS support so that they can increase that limit. And you don't sit there scratching your head, say, why can't I establish another VPN connection or another virtual interface? Okay? Another important point, if you do establish a direct connect, we are not going to advertise your routes out to the open internet. So what that means is the traffic cannot flow from your data center to AWS over Direct Connect and then out to the internet. Okay? We're not providing an internet service. This is a service to connect your facilities into AWS. Okay? You need to ensure that, as I mentioned, the route propagation and routing decisions that you make based on the routes that we advertise to you, you have some control on which paths to prefer, both using AS path prepend in one direction and BGP local preferences in the other. Okay. And again, VPCs are non-transitive, so keep it. It's not really direct connect related, but in some cases, it's good to keep in mind when you're doing your overall networking architecture. And Ethernet is Ethernet. You do not need to have gear in the colocation facilities. As long as you can deliver fiber run Ethernet with 802.1q support, you're in good shape. You can have your router be physically in your closet or in your data center. It does not matter. Okay? And if you do have an MPLS network and you have tags that you utilize in your wide area networks, those don't carry over into the AWS environment. They are stripped at that point, and so the VLAN tags that you assign for your virtual interfaces are just locally significant and only locally significant. Okay? All right. This is all I have, and be more than happy to take any questions that you have. I can't see you if you're raising your hand or not, so if you want to come up here and ask your questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Or if you want to speak out loud, I try to locate you by sonar, but shoot away.
Question.
Yep.
If you have a direct connection that's over 1 gig, can you connect to multiple VPCs in Amazon, or is it only one VPC per direct connection?
No, you have, let's say you have a 10 gig physical connection. On that physical connection, you can run multiple private virtual interfaces and connect to multiple VPCs.
Okay.
Yep. Advanced topic, so if a lot of routing and BGP knowledge, and hopefully it was beneficial.